Phil and Jared, you guys were the screenwriters of Zootopia, which is a film that deals with issues of bigotry, xenophobia, corruption. Pretty heady issues for an animated movie about talking animals. What were you guys thinking?
No idea.
Yeah, I'm still don't know.
Ill-advised.
Yeah, I think what we were thinking is we both have kids, and we loved when our kids watch a movie to be challenged by things and to deal with stuff that they are going to have to deal with in their lives, and to work on something where we could say something to them, hopefully they'll carry with them, and that other people and children and adults can carry with them is really important to us.
Yeah, and I think animation gives you liberty kind of to tackle deeper, more important subjects in a way that doesn't feel like you're preaching to somebody. You know, the movie has a message, but it's not we don't want to make a message movie necessarily. So if we can still make a fun, funny, entertaining world with a bunch of talking animals that has a deeper meaning to shine a light on human bias and prejudice and so on, then it's kind of the point. It's kind of why I want to work in animation, because you can hide big messages a little bit easier and more elegantly than you can in live action.
Mm-hmm. Well, take us through the screenwriting process. You know, Disney is known for their great story, the Brain Trust, I believe is what it's called. So take us through the process of writing the script. How many incarnations and drafts did you have to go through before you figured out, got to that sweet spot?
Literally hundreds. The animated movie at Disney takes about 5 years to make. And over those 5 years, we actually screened the movie internally 10 to 12 times. For each of those screenings, we're writing dozens and dozens of drafts, and then those drafts get turned into drawings by our story team. They're doing black and white pencil drawings or marker drawings. Those get edited together. We put sound effects, we put our own scratch dialogue in, we put temporary music in, and we screen it for our whole studio here. And we get feedback, and then we rip it apart, and we start again. So it's this constant evolution as we're trying to figure out what the best way to tell the story is.
And because different parts of the movie might be in production at different times, you might be animating a scene that's in the first act, and we're then rewriting the third act based on something that's happened in the second act that may be in production, that maybe doesn't exactly fit. So we have to, it's much more of a puzzle than a live action movie, which even if it's not shot in chronological order, is at least a linear process where you have 60 days or whatever to shoot a movie, and you're going to shoot from page 1 to page 90 at some point during those 60 days. Whereas this is a period of years where you might, you know, in year 2 do page 5 of the movie, and somewhere in year 3 you're doing page 60, and it's like a Rubik's cube of so keeping the story on track and making sense of it and keeping your themes unified is a huge challenge.
Mm-hmm. Well, talk about creating the world of Zootopia. I mean, obviously you're dealing with fantasy, but there has to be some kind of a real world, you know, it has to make sense, right? So talk about creating the world of this predators and prey existing together.
Well, that's one of the most fun parts of working here is John Lasseter, who runs both Disney Animation and Pixar, really believes in research. And so on this movie, we spent the first 9 months just doing research. So not even really worrying about the story. We met with historians and city planners and animal behaviorists. We went to zoos and animal parks around the US and actually went to Kenya on safari for 2 weeks as we were trying to figure out how this world would actually work. And we knew that we wanted to bring in animals from all over the world, that Zootopia would be the city where every type of animal around the world was represented. The trick was, okay, knowing that, how do we actually arrange them in the city that makes any sense so that we as humans could go and say, okay, I understand how this actually would work. But then also we have these vast scale differences where you have a mouse and an elephant, and we actually did the movie, which most talking animal movies don't do. We did it true to scale, which is a massive undertaking, because on top of being able to shoot that where a character like Nick can be talking to an elephant, which is really difficult to do, the city itself had to function for all of the different sized animals. And so we spent months and months and months trying to figure out how that would happen. And then even how the animals interact. So one of the things in Kenya that was really, I think, neat for us was, you see all different types of animal groups. You see wildebeest over here and zebras over here, and maybe there's some lions over here. But all the animals, prey and predator, were together in the same place, kind of in their own little groups. And there wasn't the friction between them. You'd think that a predator animal and a prey animal wouldn't be able to hang out 20 feet from each other, but they did. There's this uneasy kind of truce that happens around a watering hole. And that became something that we actually started to build the city out from, a central watering hole. That's in the very center of the city. You actually see all the water fountains is meant to be a watering hole, which is a really neat way to, I think, to look at our own human existence and say, okay, there's different groups of people, and we can really relate to that and then we apply that to animals, so you can really relate to it.
Mm-hmm. It's very clever, the way that it's all constructed, and part of that is doing the animals to scale. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about creating those individual characters. I mean, particularly Judy the bunny and Nick the fox. I mean, they're very wonderfully created three-dimensional characters.
Well, that wasn't our intent. We just wanted to do funny cartoon animals. You felt that was just an unexpected byproduct. Yeah,
I meant three-dimensional in the way they're animated. That was not.
That's a whole other department.
Yeah, well, again, part of the research, like we spent a lot of time actually looking at animals. People went down to museums and put animal fur under microscopes. This is the first movie where all of the animal fur is actually true to the actual animal's fur down to a molecular level, which is pretty phenomenal, which is why it looks so real. And then in terms of having a fox and a rabbit, these are two animals that are smaller amongst, for predators, a fox is pretty small, so he felt like an underdog. Likewise for Judy, as a bunny, she felt pretty small among other prey animals. And so we wanted both of them to be roughly the same size, but both to feel like underdogs in their world. But both foxes and rabbits are also seen all around the world. So we wanted to take two animals that no matter where you were around our human world, you would recognize those two. And as, okay, that's definitely a predator animal, this is definitely prey. And then a fox and a rabbit are also natural enemies. And we wanted to take advantage of that as well, as these two have to grow together and become friends, that there's some of that innate, I don't like you because I'm biologically predisposed to not trust you, was definitely an intentional part of the storytelling.
And just from a human standpoint, like I related very much to Judy, and I grew up in a small town in Wisconsin that was almost all white. There were a few Asian families there, no African American families in my school when I grew up. And so, so when I moved to New York City, I was, open-minded but very naive, and I think. Allowing Judy to be flawed in that way of she's well-intentioned and means well, but her experience in life was that of someone who is pretty sheltered. And so her understanding of the world was limited. And I, as a kid growing up in a small town, and now for the last 25 years have lived in New York or LA. So hopefully my mind is now sufficiently open, and I'm sufficiently educated, and have met people from every possible culture. But even still, we wanted to portray bias and prejudice in a realistic way, and it was easy for me to draw on Judy's experience, just being that I was a naive kid from a small town who thought he knew better than he did, and it's very much, I think it's a kind of universal story that we all see our limitations, and when you understand and admit that you have limitations and bias, then you can start having the conversation.
Absolutely. And the timing of this movie is kind of serendipitous, even though it took 5 years to make. I mean, a lot of these issues are being brought up again. How far do you think Zootopia can go in helping to open up conversations like that? I
mean, if it can start conversations, we've done our job. I think it would be naive to think, oh, Zootopia cures racism, or one character, solves world peace. But if we start talking about it, if it prompts a conversation among families and gets kids thinking in a way that starts seeing that fear as a dividing tactic is a low blow, you know, and then they can start recognizing how politicians and people who aren't politicians use fear as an intimidator and a way of dividing us in order to, you know, to get in power, to start recognizing that, and then also start recognizing, as Judy says, that the change has to start from within, from you. And so recognizing your own, whether it's bias or pushing yourself outside your comfort zone and reaching across the aisle. Yeah, again, if we can just start that conversation or help start the conversation, that's the most we could ask for.
Yeah, early on, and then throughout the whole production, we worked with Dr. Shakti Butler, who is an expert on bias and prejudice, and really helped us as we were going through to hone this message and make it feel very like we're talking about our modern world. And one of the things that she really stressed is there's this sense of us and them. And you can take any sort of divided groups and it's, okay, well, it's their fault, and they'd say it's their fault. And we found as we were going through that it's really the only way to actually fix this, regardless of who is more at fault in any certain situation, is everyone has to realize, okay, I have some ownership of the problem, and I have to look within myself to try to solve that. And if that doesn't happen on both sides of any issue, then it will never get solved. And we really wanted this movie to end with hopefully our audience thinking about that. We didn't want to give them, here's the answer to solve bias. We just wanted them to think, okay, well, maybe I actually am part of this, and maybe part of me is a little biased, and I need to think about that and think about how that affects the way I interact with other people or make assumptions of one another. So I think just starting the conversation is the most important thing.
Right. Sounds pretty grim, but it's also very entertaining. You know, it's very colorful and lively and funny. When you were writing the script, was there the fear that maybe the movie would get bogged down in the message?
Well, yeah, that's always a worry. I mean, I think the good thing is early on when we were pitching this, we said, okay, it's going to be about bias and prejudice with talking animals. And everyone went, how are you guys going to do that? But it's really interesting. I think that there's a lot of faith in Disney animation to make things wildly entertaining and really fun. And so in a weird way, bringing that entertainment was something that everyone felt like, oh, we can definitely do this. The harder thing was making sure that the bias angle and talking about prejudice was done in a way that felt respectful to how our world works. And we kind of had faith in ourselves that, okay, we'll find ways to bring the funny into it. But the more serious parts of it are the things that we really needed to nail.
I'm attracted to movies in general, not just ones I work on, but all films that walk a tightrope, that walk that tonal tightrope, that can be funny and grim and about something. So I'm more just naturally predisposed to like those kinds of films that tackle a subject in a way that maybe doesn't feel exactly like how you thought it would be done. So Jared said, I think it was going to be a comedy regardless. You know, we work with people who are funny, and you know, he's not funny, but I am, and
that's true.
You know, so we have that, and but as you said, it's like how do you make this theme not feel like we're banging it over someone's head or teaching a lesson to a kindergartner or like a Saturday morning cartoon with a moral that is just blatantly thrown in your face. So we had to work really hard to balance it. But I think that's the most exciting thing.
Yeah, and it's also a really fun challenge. I mean, where you say you have to balance these things, then you find ways, okay, how do we prove our point and have it be entertaining? And then we go to a DMV and it's run by sloths. And we all have preconceived notions about what sloths are. But you can translate that into any other group that you want to as a human being. But it was great because it didn't make anyone feel bad. They were really entertained by it, but it also said something at the same time. So it's trying to find areas like that where we were still making our point, but doing it in a way that didn't feel like, here's some medicine for you guys to over the course of watching this movie.
Well, what was the most difficult scene for you guys to tackle or to like find that balance? And what gave you the most trouble when you were writing that?
It's probably the scene in the press conference where Judy makes her big screw up, where Judy talks about predators being biologically predisposed to go savage, and where she lays bare her own bias. That was a scene. I came onto the movie later in the last year or so, and that was a goal that I think was always there once we figured out that we want the main character to expose her own prejudice from within. Knew we wanted that there, but how we got to that point, how we built it into the story leading up to it. So once the scene itself maybe wasn't the hardest scene to write, but earning the emotion of the scene took a lot of reverse engineering and finding, well, where was that seed planted? It came a little from her parents. It came a little bit from the town she grew up in. It came a little bit from Gideon Gray, the bully fox that beat her up. So she had these preconceived notions, even though she had buried them deep within her. We wanted that to bubble to the surface in that scene, and so it was very difficult earning that scene, I think. And so it wasn't just that scene, it was kind of the whole movie and her whole life, her whole backstory kind of leading up to that moment. So that was a real challenge.
Yeah, we didn't want it to just feel, when she said that, to feel convenient for the story, you know, that was going to be something that would separate them. We had to make it feel like this was something she would actually do, but because the audience is her watching it, that they would also say the same thing in the same situation. That allows us to then have her get really introspective and have the audience start to think about that as well. But like Phil's saying, like the number of tiny little plants along the way to make that possible was what was the most difficult.
Right. This movie's been incredibly well received by critics, audiences, awards bodies. What has that recognition meant for you guys?
Well, you know what's interesting is here at Disney Animation, one of the things that the best about getting that recognition is actually that it allows us to continue to make interesting choices in terms of the next movies that come after that. So even for Zootopia, why did we get to do Zootopia, talking animal movie, that dealt with bias, is because Frozen did huge business. So we said, take a chance on this thing that's maybe pushing on the boundaries a little bit. Anytime we get this, it allows us, I think it builds a lot of trust within the organization to say, okay, these guys can push the boundaries and do something unexpected. And it gives us a little bit more freedom to tell those stories.
And the most that makes our livelihood going forward better, for sure. And then just the idea that millions of people saw the movie, and you know, we always ask ourselves, if you knew however many, 1 billion people were listening, what would you say? And the fact that we can say something that is maybe making the world a little more thoughtful or a little better, making people think a little bit more, that's really meaningful. And of course, awards are neat, shall we say? But but it's more what it represents in terms of the work we're doing and what we're able to say, I think, honestly.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, it's a great movie, and congratulations on it. Phil and Jared, thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
Thanks very much.
You're welcome. Have a great day.